podcast.ph can be downloaded for free on iTunes by typing podcast.ph programs. You can also listen on Podomatic, Spreaker, Stitcher, Clamor, YouTube, and our official URL, podcast.ph. Like and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Google+. Podcast.ph, the most active and fastest growing podcast network in the Philippines.
I am not seduced by power. I have said no to power when I resigned. I do believe, not because of myself, that the only people that you can trust with power is those that hate power. I think that's the reason why I think people should vote for me.
We are back here in this program, Bonfire Discussions on podcast.ph. My name is Martin and we're still with Dr. Walden Bello, who is running for senator here in the Philippines. What is your advocacy when it comes to the environment, particularly the use of fossil fuel?
Well, I think definitely that we must radically reduce the use of fossil fuels. There's just no way, as we've seen, consensus na ito, that we must really move away from fossil fuels like oil and coal and move towards cleaner sources of energy like solar and wind. And it's clear naman that the costs of alternative energy are going down, no? And so I think we must live up to the laws that we have already passed to promote solar and other alternative energies and move away from fossil fuels like coal. No? And unfortunately, again, may lip service ang gobyerno natin. Instead of moving away from coal, it's intensifying the use of coal. So I think we have a responsibility to the country and the world to live up to our commitments. No? And I think this is why I was a bit disappointed, really, by the speech of the president in Paris, because the unmentionable thing there was that the Philippines was moving into a coal-driven path. No? So I would say here that that's going to be very, very important to take very seriously our laws that are pushing for alternative energy sources.
So given a situation, a scenario wherein you are in a barangay, for instance, and the power is run by coal power plant, and that coal power plant can fire up the entire barangay, and then you have an alternative like solar power who can just power 25% of the population. Which solution would you go for?
Well, my sense is we need to have a phase-out period from fossil fuels, as we decrease the use of fossil fuels, we should have a very concerted effort to be able to use the latest advances in solar power, and wind power. And as I said, these are becoming more and more cost effective.
Yes.
So that the idea that coal and oil will always be the most cost effective, I think that's being disproven by experience. No? And indeed, research in China and in Germany, in Denmark, are in fact already pushing to new vistas in terms of where to go for energy. And as we know, sometimes it is easier for countries that are not so committed to a coal or a fossil fuel-driven path to change, no? Than countries where you have the whole energy structure that's imprisoned in oil and coal, kagaya ng United States. No? Kasi the problem here is that you not only are wedded to a technology, you are wedded to forces that support that technology. So my sense is that we really need, coming back to your question, we really need phase-out period of coal and oil, and a phase-in period for alternative energy sources.
Yeah.
So my sense is that that is the kind of plans. These are the kinds of hard planning that we really need at this point.
Yeah, in fact, I was just reading an article about this company called Power Hive, based in New Zealand, where they run solar panels around the world, and they control it from New Zealand through satellite. Very cost effective. And I was just wondering and thinking, maybe we can have that here in some of our far-flung barangays in the Philippines where there's no power. Okay, another question. That's got to do with our political system or government structure. Do you think we should change our government structure from presidential to a parliamentary form or other forms of government?
Well, I've been looking at this, and I think that the problem really is not so much the form of government, because if you look at the situation, a parliamentary form of government and presidential forms of government usually have the same problems, which is corruption, which is rule by vested interests, which is marginalization of people. So the problem is really not in the form of government. I think it is in political will. And my sense is, that we should really look at, creating coalitions that come to power that are, based on, on strong determination to change, the way things are going, and also coalitions that are led by leaders with high ethical standards. And so I hate to use this term because it's so much used already, but I do think that you could have a presidential system that is marked by leadership with a high political will, that respects democratic methods, and yet gets things done. So as far as I'm concerned, rather than spending time with constitutional tinkering at this point, trying to push a parliamentary system as opposed to a presidential system, I think what we should really be looking for is how do we develop leaders and coalitions, that have programs with people led by high ethical standards that can generate the political will to push things to get things done. So that's my take on this issue.
We have a lot of bright people, bright workers. The manpower in the Philippines is just fantastic, off the roof. As a matter of fact, that's why they're overseas and they're being hired. And we have also a lot of bright politicians, writers, philosophers here in this country. Saan ba nagkamali? Saan tayo nagkamali?
Well, I think there are, again, several issues here. One is we should really take a good look at our social structure. And I think we have a situation where we have a very unequal system of the distribution of power and wealth. And so I think that's number one issue is, how do we change that system so that we really make it a more economically and socially democratic system na hindi lang forms of political democracy that are imposed on very unequal social and economic systems. Sa tingin ko, it's very important to in fact make sure that democracy does not just relate to politics but to economics. Secondly, you really need a political culture that really prizes high ethical standards and honesty. And my sense is that this can be developed. We really need this political culture, and our educational system is very, very important in terms of promoting this. No? So yung education is key. And so I would say that the last point that I would really come back to again is how do we create a course of leaders that combine high ethics, political vision, and political programs. Yeah. So my sense is that it's not too late for us. I think that there are some false solutions. There are some people who advocate shortcuts. There are some people that basically say due process and democracy. The Philippines has had that. Let's go for an authoritarian system. I think it would be wrong to be seduced by these false solutions and shortcuts. No? So I'm very hopeful about our country. But sometimes it takes crisis like what we're undergoing right now. A crisis of confidence, a crisis of political culture, a big crisis, where it doesn't seem like we're moving forward, to generate the sense of urgency and emergency that we do need. No? So in that sense, I think that crisis creates the opportunity for real reform. And we are now on the brink of that. We're on the threshold of that. But at the same time, there is no guarantee. Okay, you may be in the threshold of opportunity, crisis creating opportunity, but you could go off the rails, or you could move forward. So tinatawag rito na contingency. So there is no guarantee. It's just that we must all take the leap together.
We've had a lot of crises already, opportunities as well.
Yes.
86, we had the Estrada crisis, GMA, and then it seems like we never learn from our mistakes. Okay, a couple of more questions.
Sure.
You mentioned about social structures, but I want to talk about the social problems that we have.
Yes.
Particularly, well, one is crime. Number two would be the negative or the social costs of our OFWs. We have more than 8 million. I think we're pushing 10. How would you solve that?
We must acknowledge, first of all, that there is a problem. Okay? And the problem when it comes to crime was that if you recall the National Police Chief, who is no longer the police chief,
His name?
Alan Purisima,
yeah.
In fact, was trying to prove that there was no crime wave. Okay? And the Interior and Local Government Secretary, who also is no longer there, basically did nothing to control this guy who was basically saying that there's no crime wave. It is an illusion to think that there's a crime wave. So I think, first of all, it must be acknowledged that there is this problem. No? So mahalaga talaga yan. Secondly, I think we must realize that a lot of these problems are rooted in poverty. No? Solving the poverty issue is also a way that we can bring down the crime rate. No? So social reform is extremely, extremely important. That's of course not going to eliminate crime because there are other sources of crime than just poverty. But my sense is, this is very important when we deal with the crime issue, that we have enlightened methods of dealing with it, that we solve the poverty issue, but at the same time, we must realize that, due process and the rule of law is very important. Kaya nga, itong double standards is very important, that because if justice is not blind and your cronies don't get punished, but your enemies get punished, then I think that has a very corruptive effect. So that's why napakalakas ng stand ko na kailangan ng no double standards. No? Now, when it comes to the OFWs, let's face it, a major part of the reason is really economic. Now, of course, there are people who go out of the country for adventure and that sort of thing, but a lot of people are pushed out because they just don't find the opportunities here. They want to escape poverty. And again, the solution to our OFWs is how do we create an economic system that creates the opportunities that makes people stay at home and in fact uses their talents. Because as you said, Martin, talagang very talented mga Filipinos. No? But how do we harness those energies to be able to channel it into national development? No? So again, here, the solutions here are political, economic, and cultural. And clearly, there has to be economic reform in this country. And I'm not talking about more and more market, more liberalization, but more reform in a direction of social justice, more progressive thinking, more progressive economic policies. No? So I think that this is not to deny that these are complex problems needing complex solutions. But when you come right down to it, I think it is political will and determination that is really going to be key in terms of pushing this forward. Political will and determination that is supported by a very strong ethical standards of the people in leadership. And secondly, the concept of blind justice that basically uses the law in order to, in fact, punish both friends and foes who, in fact, are corrupt and who engage in crime. No? So, ito yung mga kailangan natin ngayon. No? And I'm confident that we can, in fact, find the right formula, not a perfect formula, but the right formula that would drive the country forward.
You mentioned the political will and determination a few times already, and looks like that is the basic thing that we need for this country. When you look at technology in our country, parang hindi umuusad. Yung tren natin, halos non-existent yung tren. Tapos pagdating sa internet, mabagal yung internet natin. What is your vision for technology? What do you think technology would be a big solution to the problems that we have?
Well, I think essentially speaking, if you look at your two examples, the train system, and the reason that it has not moved forward because monopolistic privileges by certain groups of people wanted to corner profits at the expense of an efficient mass transit system. And the same thing for our internet. So what seems to be technological problems are really social problems, that monopolies want to stay in control. The government is weak, or the government is run by people very close to those that control these advanced technologies. And so I would say that technology can be a very, very powerful force for bringing us forward. And I'm talking about mass transit. We're talking about fast internet systems, fast information systems. And if we ask ourselves, how did the MRT in Hong Kong get to be so efficient, that it is able to really deal with transporting millions of people in a very efficient way? Of course, they're crowded, but they work. And the same thing with Singapore. And I think here it's because you have a government that basically looks after the welfare of commuters, okay, and does not allow the benefits of the technology to be cornered by a few people who then use it mainly to promote their interests rather than promote the interests of commuters and consumers. No, so sa tingin ko, what seems to be technological problems are really social and political problems. So that's why I think the solution is to untie the knot that connects monopolies and government technocrats that are either in hock to those monopolies or are scared to take them on.
One last question related to technology. The PCOS machine, and you are aware, of course, with the biometrics, you have about 2.6 million Filipinos who will be disenfranchised to vote. You have brilliant technology, but for some reason, some people think it's not used properly or used for evil ends. What do you think about it?
We've had this debate about the PCOS machines, no? And I must say that it's been neither resolved in one way or the other, okay? Because we've had this long-standing debate that it doesn't seem like it can be resolved, but the elections are closing in, and we have to do what we have to do. But what we need to do is to make sure that we have a core of technicians that can really assure that there is no playing around with information technology to determine the results of the elections. No? So, this is a compromise that needs to be made, because we cannot just, at this point in time, certain decisions have been made. Now we want just to make sure that those decisions do not result in widespread fraud. No? With respect to the other problem you mentioned, which was...
I mentioned the biometrics.
The biometrics. My sense is I think that there should have been much more sensitivity to the fact that you cannot just push this in the way that the COMELEC has pushed it. You know? That there should be more time to be able to accommodate, the fact that, so many people, precisely because of the fact that the electoral bodies have not really been pushing very hard on, making sure that the biometrics are there. Hindi naman kasalanan ng mga tao yan eh. Kasalanan talaga yan ng COMELEC, no? That it should have tried harder rather than to then blame the people to say that, it's because you guys did not do this. So my sense is maybe the Supreme Court should revisit its decision because on biometrics, because I think this threat of disenfranchisement of 2.6 million, malaki yan.
Yeah.
Even if it's just 100,000 people who are disenfranchised because of a wrong-headed policy, I don't think we should allow that sort of thing. And I don't see why they cannot postpone this biometrics, system in terms of people fulfilling it until the next elections. No, but at this point in time, I think there should be much more compromise when it comes to the biometrics.
Considering we're dealing with the most fundamental right to vote, the only right where we can change our leaders.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have here with me your full-page ad. Join Walden's electoral insurgency. Crusade against politics as usual today. So, this is the last question. Not really a question, but I'm giving an opportunity to convince our netizens who are watching all over the world, Filipinos, and tell them why they should vote for you. This is a 5-minute clock.
I would like to say again, that I served for 6 years in the House of Representatives. And I think people see my record there. Among the accomplishments are being a principal author of the Reproductive Health Bill, the Agrarian Reform Extension Law, the law that amends the Overseas Voting Act to make it easier for our citizens abroad and our workers abroad to vote. And I was chair of the Overseas Workers Affairs Committee in the House, where I struggled very hard to promote the interests of our OFWs. I was the author of the resolution that renamed the South China Sea the West Philippine Sea. At the same time that I have asked for the abrogation of the Visiting Forces Agreement, because I believe we need to have an independent foreign policy, independent of both China and the United States. And I believe that we should eliminate the automatic appropriations law, which says that foreign and domestic debtors have the first cut in the budget, and 35% of the budget going to repay the foreign debt is criminal, okay? Because it takes away resources for education and other very important social needs. I do believe that we must have very strong controls over monopolies, over transnational corporations, so that they do not end up exploiting our people, and we can have a national economy that harmonizes civil society, the state, and the private sector, and the public sector. No? We need a national development plan that is just, that will promote both development and social equity. So these are things that I've struggled for all my life, and I would say that this is my record. That's the program. But above all, I would say you need people with high ethical standards that have proven. Okay? And I think that although I do not want to talk about myself, I am not seduced by power. I have said no to power when I resigned. And I do believe, not because of myself, that the only people that you can trust with power is those that hate power. Okay? And I think that, in a nutshell, I think that's the reason why I think people should vote for me. Now, if they don't vote for me, okay, I, have plans of continuing my study of the global economic system, and this is also a project that I really want to figure out, because I think that we really need to unravel the sources of discord, the sources of inequality. And I am fascinated by the global economy, and I think there are ways that we can make it more humane to serve the interests of our people. But if you ask me at this point in time, what do I prefer to do, to be in the Senate or to be a global economic analyst, at this point in time, I'd like to be in the Senate.
Thank you so much, Dr. Walden Bello, and good luck to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Martin, for inviting me here. This has been such a fascinating discussion. It's always fascinating to have an interlocutor who has the right questions, not the easy questions, but the right questions, because sometimes the right questions are the hard questions.
I did ask you a question on television about who would you give your last peso to, a newly born or a geriatric on his way out?
Oh, well, that's a very difficult question. I mean, it seems like, but sometimes we are forced to make decisions like that. So.
And your answer is?
I answered that the newly born, because I said that, if you don't like my answer of giving half and half to either, you really are forced. I would say the newly born, because the newly born are the hope of the motherland.
Thank you so much once again. He is Dr. Walden Bello. He's running for the Senate. A lot of my friends say that he is the modern Jose Rizal. If you want to vote for him, go share this podcast. And Hopefully this gets to the entire population online.
Thank you, Martin. But of course, in terms of the love life, hindi incomparable si Jose Rizal.
Download this for free on iTunes. You can also go to our official website, which is podcast.ph. You can listen or watch this on YouTube or go to our podcast.ph Facebook page. See you again next time. Thank you for watching.
This podcast.ph presentation is supported by Martin Andanar's Homecast Studio and audio.ph.